Hello, I'm Phil Jones, and this is one of a series of videos explaining how to use the Balanced Scorecard effectively in transformation projects. And I don't mean just the Balanced Scorecard, I mean the whole approach. In this video I interview a gentleman called Steve Lunn. Steve was working at Anglian Water, helping to form a transformation project that was to dramatically improve their performance. And if you've ever wondered how to really engage a management team, how to get the rest of the organisation to change the way they look at performance and get as far as changing the incentives and rewards, then this video's got some great guidance for you.
Anglian was going through a position where it had sort of had a balance, or tried to balance, regulatory work with growth.
Yes.
So they'd taken over Morrison's,
Yes.
was finding it difficult to grapple between merging the two together. And around 2001 the group agreed to separate and ring-fence the water company, water and sewerage company, from the rest of the group.
Right. And going back to the core.
Going back to roots, absolutely, and focusing on the core regulatory business.
Yeah.
They, as part of that, the funding mechanism for the organisation was shifted from a majority equity-based system to debt, which meant different stakeholders coming in, banks for example.
Yeah.
And as part of the thinking around that, because I'd done I think a fairly good piece of work within customer services before, and then as director, I was asked to pull together a transformation programme for helping the organisation cope with this substantial change in stakeholder base, but also because the business was below average performer, both financially with regard to Ofwat, but also in the overall performance assessment ratings for Ofwat, was to try and push them up the rankings, because the next price determination was due in a couple of years. And the way the mechanism works, and I think it still does today, is that if you're higher up the pack, you've got an opportunity to increase turnover, whereas if you're a poorer performer, there's a chance that you may need to reduce turnover because you're not delivering the service to customers. So effectively reduce prices, thus reducing turnover. So the objective was to move Anglian from sixth place performer in the 10 water and sewerage companies in England and Wales, ideally to the top 2. Right. So I was asked, could I think about this and what would be done? So it was a huge sort of undertaking, and I put a paper to the board, effectively highlighting what I felt were the issues within the organisation and the reason for the less than average performance. Right. Again, trying to focus on causes, not symptoms. So I tend to do, just a person, tend to try and get to the root causes of things. Now, that was a relatively short paper to the exec. They bought into what I was saying and what needed to be done. And to cut a long story short, I suggested that I had a team of people that I was able to pick from across the business. So what I'd say is like-minded individuals, people who understood strategy, but also got stuck into the detail and got their hands dirty. Really. So that was the way I approached things. But it involved the whole sort of life cycle of change, right from vision all the way through to delivery of programs and projects within the portfolio of change. So it involved constructing a new vision for the organisation, then doing a work on the strategy effectively below it, but really focusing on new strategic objectives for the organisation.
That brought it back to this focus of the core.
Absolutely, absolutely. And recognising there were new stakeholders and a lot of engagement with the executive board, but also the non-execs as well, who were interested in how this was going to be done. And indeed, along the way, making sure that we engage with the banks, because they were obviously a key.
So you're covering all the bases there. I mean, you're looking at the regulators. You're thinking, okay, how do we do customers? And you're thinking about the non-executives and the potential investors. So you're looking at a portfolio of the wider potential stakeholders.
If you looked at your stakeholder map, hopefully you've got everything. Obviously, at that stage, we're not engaging too much with Ofwat. Clearly, when they want to know the situation with regards to what the targets, etc., are going to be. So, but at that stage, it was really sort of employees, employers, but also the external key external stakeholders.
I think that's a really important point, that so many people look at the balanced scorecard and go, well, there's only a customer perspective. But you shouldn't let that constrain you to look at the wider objectives. So we have different types of customers, as we said earlier, with the the meter and non-meter and business. And now you're saying, you know what, we actually need to think about what do the banks want, because they're wanting regulatory, because there's a regulatory perspective, and you enrich the customer perspective. But not all of them are giving you money. Well, banks are giving you money, but they only give it you in tranches and expect something
and the
back.
Customers are giving you money.
Customers are giving you money once you bill them for the water. There's a slightly different transaction going on there.
Sure, yeah.
The non-execs, you're giving them money to turn up and their advice. But you're looking at different types of relationships going on and how you manage those relationships. And people just, I think they lose that. They go, it's a weakness of the balanced scorecard because it only does customers. But it's only a weakness of the thinking that it's in the way it's applied.
Absolutely. And it does the whole thing, as you say. I mean, at that stage, I mean, the balanced scorecard was one of a number of tools. I used a strategy map. And I used a strategic management process.
Okay.
So using that, but then reintroducing the scorecard into the execs' minds.
Okay.
To be honest, after 98, 99, it had taken a place on a shelf and hadn't really been used.
Okay.
I think the mindset was, yes, that was a tool that did a particular job.
Right, it got us.
Whereas
to the
you and I know
organisation.
it isn't that, and it can be used far more widely than that. I then chose to gently reintroduce it alongside strategic management process, which was the thing I would put in front of the exec every week when I had my weekly programme meeting with them on progress with the programme. I mean, I use the map to the strategy map and scorecard to construct the objectives for the organisation.
Excellent.
And then using a team, cascading it down to the directorates below that and making sure they all funnelled in, and effectively used the map and the scorecard, the corporate scorecard, as the performance contract between the regulated water company and the group, by applying different percentages, etc. to it. So objectives, measures and targets that hung off the strategic objectives that we'd identified as a team, as a peer group, within the initial work we did, and really powerful. But again, using the tool and making sure we were getting people bought in. So my tactic, which I don't think is specific to scorecards or anything, is just I like to reintroduce it and say, here we are. So for example, I probably bored the executive board rigid, because every meeting I would lay them out there and say, we remember this. And then played a game one day when I didn't put it on the table. And they said, where is it? And then I think you think, well, actually, it's work. And we've got it in people's psyche, and also things, other tools that I think can fall off scorecards for cause and symptom models. So you get people to identify the symptom, and then you can use the scorecard or the strategy map to say, that's what you're seeing there, and really is it down? But actually, it's there. So
I do like this idea of keep using it in front of people. I think one of the things that might probably have gone on with the previous incarnation is we used it as a mechanism of change to help design the change. Then we used the strategy maps for that, and the scorecards tended to persist, but the strategy maps didn't, I suspect. And what you're saying now is, in the second phase, in this latter one, you use the strategy map as the driver of the strategy, as part of it, kept putting it in people's face. This is what's going to drive change. This is what's going to make the difference. And I do like the idea of you just not revealing it one day and seeing if they notice.
And that's part of it, Phil.
Anchoring the idea.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
The other bit is measuring against it, which was I think a really key, a key aspect of it. Obviously, from my accountancy and performance background, because I used to do a lot of financial and non-financial performance monitoring, it's imperative that you keep on top of it. So alongside that, it was actually about driving a performance improvement culture, measuring the things that needed to be measured, and not just focusing not just on the regulatory indicators. There were other things that actually the organisation wasn't measuring, that through work on the scorecard and identifying the key processes, that perhaps people knew, but it never been put down on paper sometimes, but others that were probably not even on the radar screen before, is actually focusing on those and mapping them. So I'd say the scorecard was a lever for making the organisation actually map processes, and particularly when you lined up all the scorecards alongside each other, you then identify interfaces. So, for example, it's probably common knowledge that a lot of the people who are going to view this video, but people can own an objective, but they don't control all the levers for delivering on that objective. And the thing is, often, there are people in other directorates and maybe even outside the organisation. So it's key to identify those. So I went a stage further and started identifying objectives where you were owned or actually contributed to, and the next key thing alongside that, and you bear in mind all this is coming from the scorecard and strategy map and the strategic management process, is then changing the incentive mechanism alongside it, which is quite key, and it's very emotive, a very emotive subject if you're into incentive mechanisms, be they bonus or performance related pay or whatever, but actually making sure that if people were confident in the concept and the cascade of objectives, by definition they shouldn't really have a problem with the incentive mechanism being geared towards company performance. Now, rather than one directorate, for example.
And I think what you've done there is quite interesting. Let's just step back over it. The first thing you do is you're taking a wider perspective of how the organisation is measured.
Absolutely.
So you did not just the regulatory. The second thing is that you're looking at the drivers. So what is it that's going to bring about change and ripple up through the strategy map for causality? You're getting individual management teams on board, from the board and the executive through the pieces. You're giving it them regularly so they have the confidence that this reflects what they have to do in their wider picture.
Absolutely.
You're joining them up to say, how do we do our bit, and whose work do we need, whose help do we need, and how can we help others, which starts to create the joined up thinking, not the narrow silo thinking that measurement often does, but you're actually getting, how do we collectively do this? And then after that, when people have got the confidence that it feels right, you lay over the top the incentive of, okay, now we're looking at overall company performance, that you now are comfortable with all the pieces in. You can't possibly argue with the incentive. Argue with the incentives.
Absolutely. It takes a while. Because again, you've got to get people bought in, and if we're honest about it, there were teething problems with it. When you're moving from perhaps individual incentives or individual performance to corporate performance, people can feel like they're a power button's being taken away from them. So what you've got to do is really spend the time getting them engaged, and clearly if you haven't got them engaged and bought in at the senior level, you can't expect people below them to be bought in.
So having looked at how we set up a transformation project using the Balanced Scorecard and really get engagement with the senior management team, in the next video we're going to talk about how you actually gain credibility across the organisation, pick up some of the tips that you want to avoid mistakes, and you can actually change the way incentives and rewards work. But there's a whole host of things you have to make sure you've got in place beforehand. So check out the next video or go to our website www.excitant.co.uk.